Much for being here tonight. It's December 6th, 2023, and this is a public meeting of the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Community Engagement Subcommittee. A lot of words there. All right, next slide. Okay, let's get started with introductions. I will hand it over to one of our subcommittee co-chairs, Ashley, to get us started, and then she can pass it along.
Yeah, thanks, Story. Make sure I got him on mute. Yeah, okay. Sorry, my slides up here. Dory, we gonna start with introductions?
Yeah,
sorry,
just intros. Yeah, just intros.
Okay. So sorry, I am all over the place here. My name is Ashley Schofield. I use she, her pronouns, and as Dory said, I'm one of the co-chairs here for the Community Engagement Subcommittee. Go ahead, Tia.
My name is Tia Palafox. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a co-chair of the Community Engagement Subcommittee for PCCEP. Thank you, and I'll pass it to Celeste.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Celeste Carey. I am one of the co-chairs of the PCCEP committee. And passing it over to you, Pastor.
Hi, Pastor Robin Weisner, co-chair, along with the lovely Celeste of the PCCEP full community, as well as the last, I believe, policy and settlement until we make decisions there. And then it looks like we have Byron in the house.
Can you see me?
Can't see you. See your background.
Oh.
Your football player background.
Oh, I'm sorry. Byron Vaughn, PCCEP member, subcommittee member of Policy and Settlement Agreement. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, are there any I don't think that's all the PCCEP members.
No, we have some more. I see Kip.
Sorry.
I see Malay.
Yeah, gosh, I'm sorry, guys.
Kip.
Yeah, no problem. Kip Silverman, PCCEP member. And I'm driving, so I can't pick somebody else. So please volunteer.
Sure.
Thanks for everybody showing up tonight, though.
Thanks, Kip. Carrie, how about you?
Hi, Carrie Driver, PCCEP member. Are there any PCCEP members left to hand it off to?
I see Odelia.
Odelia.
And yeah.
Hi, it's Odelia here, PCCEP member, and I'll pass it to Malay.
Hi, good to see you guys today and this afternoon. My name is Malay Ramos, and I'm a PCCEP member.
All right, I think we got all our PCCEP members, unless I'm missing anybody. Cool. So at this time, let's move to any city staff present. Love to hear from DOJ. I see some COCL folks here, as well as PPB. And I'll start. I'm Dory Grabinski, PCCEP project manager, and anybody else, please just jump in.
Hi, folks. Stephanie Howard, Mayor's Director of Community Safety. Good to see you all tonight.
Hi, everyone. Samir Canal, Community Safety Division Advisory Boards and Commissions Manager. Good to see you all.
Good evening, Mary Claire Buckley, Portland Police Bureau. Thanks.
I'll go next. Teresa Alonso Leon, one of your facilitators.
I'm Christoph with the COCL team.
Jonas Kaiser with DOJ.
Great. Thank you. And let's move into, I think next we have community agreements. Any volunteers, PCCEP, to read these?
Yeah, I'll get them started. So our community agreement, as always, listen, listen actively and respectfully, share airtime, be present and open to new information and perspectives, assume positive intent, respect each other, respect the group, speak our own truth, communicate directly, honestly, and respectfully, ask questions to clarify, call out bias, and be okay with ambiguity.
And Ashley, do you want to just continue on here?
Yeah, sure. So we've kind of got a pretty to the point agenda tonight. We're going to start off with our community spotlight. So thankful for their time. Kyra Sharon, hopefully I've said that right. And Tia will introduce them. So we'll start off with that. And about, after 15 minutes, we'll probably move on to debriefing of the fairness hearing from last Thursday, November 30th. I know we've got some folks from the city and DOJ here to give us a debrief. So looking forward to that. And then, as always, we'll open it up to public comment at the end. So, yeah, Tia, I'll give you the floor to do the introduction.
Sounds good. Just really quick, I wanted to say a little bit about our community spotlight. Each month we start off with a community organization presentation for deeper community engagement. And if your organization would like a spot in one of our monthly meetings, please reach out to Ashley or myself to get scheduled. And tonight we have Kyra Sharon. She's a lead crisis intervention specialist at the Unity Center for Behavioral Health. So Kyra, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and go ahead and start your presentation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm aware that you have a jam-packed agenda tonight, so I will definitely keep this brief and leave some space for any questions because that's where the real fun is. So my name is Kyra Sharon. I'm use she and her pronouns. I'm a crisis intervention specialist at Unity Center for Behavioral Health in the Psychiatric Emergency Services, or PES. That is our emergency department. As many of you may know, but I don't want to assume that anybody knows, Unity is one of the psychiatric hospitals in the city of Portland, but we actually serve the surrounding counties and even the entire state, because in addition to having inpatient psychiatric units, we are the only psychiatric emergency department in the entire state. So in addition to having 85 adult inpatient psychiatric beds and 22 adolescent psychiatric beds that treat patients between the ages of 9 and 17, we also have an emergency department that is staffed by a psychiatric nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist and a social worker 24/7. So patients can come in crisis at absolutely any hour of the day and be seen by a psychiatric provider and a social worker and figure out what's going on, how we can help, and what services are needed. We interact with the Portland Police Bureau in a ton of different ways, especially in the emergency department, but also on our inpatient units. As you all are, I'm sure, very well aware, people with severe and persistent mental illness are at a greatly increased risk of being the victims of violence. So we actually frequently have police officers come on site to take statements, help our patients fill out police reports, make sure that their story is heard. One of the other main ways in which we interact with the police department every single day is when officers engage in a courtesy drop-off, meaning that either the person in crisis or a passerby in the community has flagged them down in the community and said, hey, I'm in crisis, I need help, I want to go to the hospital. And those officers are actually supported by the Portland Police Bureau with the support of their sergeant to actually drive that person straight to the hospital, sit with them in our lobby, give a warm handoff to our nurses or social workers, and make sure that that person gets seen by a doctor. The other main way that we engage with the Portland Police Department is when officers are called out in the community to a person in crisis. And when they assess that person in crisis to be meeting the threshold for a police officer hold, meaning that they are exhibiting behaviors that place them at imminent risk to themselves or others and are in need of being evaluated for an emergency. I apologize, my dog is barking, for emergency services. They can actually place that individual on a police officer hold and have them brought into the hospital to be evaluated by a doctor and a social worker to determine what the next steps are. One of the questions that I was asked to think about is, in what way can this community be of support to Unity? And I think the main thing is in the past, there has been a lot of miscommunication, especially in the early years of Unity, with police officers in whether or not they are welcome on site. And that is due to the fact that they have firearms on them. We are actually undergoing some reconstruction on the first floor of our hospital that will actually make it so that we can do a warm handoff with police officers that are bringing in patients in a space that is separate from where other patients are, so that we can do that without having officers in the same space and have their firearms in the same space, while also making sure that officers feel welcomed and supported to bring our community members in, because people in help need to get here however they can. So that would be the main thing that I would ask. The other thing is, if you have any ability to encourage officers to stay and give us a warm handoff on what's going on and why the person's coming in, or at least leave a card with their phone number so that we can follow up, I would find that incredibly helpful. All right, I tried to do that as fast as I could. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, the intention of these community spotlights have really just been a space for PCCEP to be, you know, kind of giving this connection with, you know, the work that you're doing and the work that PPB is trying to do and the work the community wants to be involved in. And so just really appreciate your time and, you know, energy to come here. And, you know, I always learn so much from these spaces. So definitely learned a lot today and of you know, sort of the population you're working with, and yeah, that connection and that relationship with PPB is really helpful to know. And I, you know, I think one of our main questions out of this, having you come to this community spotlight, is also to ask, you know, one, thank you so much for coming to our space. You know, maybe there's an opportunity for us to come out to your space someday, or you know, have some sort of other connection. But also wanted to take the opportunity to ask if, you know, so yeah, I really appreciate you telling us how this community could support your efforts. But, you know, just, you know, what do you think, what else do you think PCCEP in the arm of being the arm with the mayor's office and the city and the community? I mean, do you, you know, are there, I don't want to say concerns, but you know, are there anything out there that policy or directives that you've had your ear to at all that PCCEP could, you know, maybe be a connector of information sharing and stuff? Yeah, hopefully that made sense. But yeah, I think you kind of answered the question, but it's still the question. Yeah.
And I think, I apologize, I don't know enough about your organization to have a truly thought out, thoughtful response to that. I think that there was a lot of difficulty with how the hospital started. I see that Miss Walida is here from Folktime. She was here, we worked together. She knows a lot about this, but the way that we worked with officers in the beginning, the way we worked with community in the beginning had some rocky steps, and we have made so many changes since then. And we continue to try to work both with the community and officers to try to fix any sort of miscommunications or ways in which we can better cooperate. So I don't have an answer to how the mayor's office or how you guys can help better support us, other than just knowing we want everyone to come get help. Anybody that wants help, we're open 24/7. We're always wanting officers to bring people in. We're always wanting folks to come see us, because I do believe that mental illness is a thing that has a path to recovery.
Thank you so much, Kyra. That's a great way of letting folks know how they can engage. I want to just remind folks that we're going to look at questions coming from the committee members first, and then we'll go to the public. So do we have any other folks from the committee, from the PCCEP committee, who may have questions?
Robin. Pastor Rob can go first.
No, Tia, please.
I was just wondering, Kyra, if you had a connection at the police department, do you communicate your wants and needs with them about the handoff?
Absolutely. Both myself and my supervisor actually present yearly at their, I think it's called the ECIT training, their annual mental health training. We actually go and do a presentation to all the officers. And this is a thing that is, this recommendation is actually coming out of the conversations with those officers specifically.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Tia. Pastor Weisner and then Celeste. And then if we don't have any other committee members, we'll go to Diane.
No, actually, Kyra answered that question very good. I was gonna comment there. And then also thanks again, Walida Ross, for being here with Folks Time. Of those who don't know, I put a direct link in there to give them more information about the work that this spectacular group that's being spotlighted tonight are doing.
Thank you, Pastor Weisner. Go ahead, Celeste.
Tia asked part of my question. The other part of my, well, there's two other questions, but the second part is, if you present yearly, that is great, but I'm wondering if you have a need for, would it be helpful to have more of a liaison relationship where you might connect more frequently, you know, quarterly or monthly or whatever? And then wondering, is there anything we can do to our PPB connections here tonight to perhaps create that relationship?
I would love that. One of the main questions I get from officers when I am talking with them is they're interested in a better understanding of the mental health system, the ways the laws work, and I would love an opportunity to better engage with them around that and better coordinate care. They see the patients that I see every day. They're seeing them every day, right? They know them by first name. They know everything about them. And I would love to coordinate care better. So however we can do that, I would love that support.
Okay, so maybe that's something we put on our agenda. And I know we do have a meeting coming up this Friday, I believe, with the chief and the mayor. So we'll bring that up as well then. And then my second question is, are there any legislative points that we could help advocate for regarding any changes you might need with either the warm handoff with the police situation or anything else? We have other organizations that do have advocacy groups, and that's one of our next steps, and as well as whatever abilities PCCEP itself has to help legislatively advocate. So if you don't know right now, you you can always contact either the community engagement co-chairs or either one of us, and we can talk about that later.
That is such an amazing question. It does look like my time is up. So I will say, as a Unity representative, advocacy for step-down care is critical. Advocacy for residential treatment facilities, advocacy for more staff at outpatient clinics, all of that is critical. As a ONA union member, so not a legacy representative, but as an ONA union representative, advocacy around safe staffing laws is critical. That is where I would ask for support, making sure that we have the human beings that are skilled and qualified in the place to do the work to help the people that need us.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. This was a joy. Thank you.
All right, actually, you have a couple more questions. So let's head over to Diane, and then there's a question on the in the chat. So Diane, go ahead.
I've lived in inner Northeast since the 80s, and so was involved with community policing a lot during that time frame. And I also have worked in various capacities with a lot of mental health concerns. So I'm one of those folks who, one, stops every time I see somebody that's in crisis, and two, often get called at home because somebody I know is seeing somebody in crisis and asked me to come support them. And what I've found recently in the last few years, actually since George Floyd, is that that kind of community service piece is there sometimes, but it's few and far between. At this point, often when when we call police and they come, they're the stories I get are varied, but they all kind of go along the lines of, oh, we've had too many budget cuts, and so we're not able to like deal with this kind of situation. Or, and even after the mayor said that that was no longer an appropriate response, I still was getting it. Or anyway, there's been a number of responses that seem very not okay from a community service perspective. And I just wanted to mention that, because Unity is such a treasure in the community, and often I end up going with people to Unity when they're in crisis. And I just feel like there's probably a lot of missed opportunities out there, given what my very small experience has been.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you so much for coming in with community members. I think that that is the most important thing, is coming in with folks. The emergency department is terrifying.
Kara, we have a chat question, and then another committee member raised their hand. Can you say a few more minutes?
Oh, I'm happy to.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So from the chat, from Stephanie Howard, she says, can you speak to how whether Unity interacts with people who may be experiencing drug-related behavioral issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple exciting things coming in the future, but right now, that is a significant portion of the work that we do. What I really like about working at Unity is that in the emergency department and on the inpatient units, we don't differentiate between a mental health diagnosis and a substance use diagnosis. It is all interconnected. You cannot treat them separately successfully. What's really exciting is that a part of the construction that I had talked about earlier, we are actually building a modest, it's only 9 beds, but a sobering center, and a place where we can directly connect people suffering specifically with substance use disorders with the treatment that they need. So I'm very excited about that in the future. But I think that that's something that we do very well, and it's something that I hope people continue to come to us for help with.
That's wonderful to hear. Walida, go ahead. You're on mute, Walida. Still on mute.
Thank you for unmuting me. I'm on this iPhone. Thank you.
Oh.
So, Kara, I do want to thank you for acknowledging me. Yes, I did work at Unity, and I work with full time right now. I am the supervisor of the training hub, the director of equity program there, and we certify people to be peer supports in the state of Oregon. And we did have a contract with Unity Hospital for 5 years, and I'm blessed to be able to work there. And Unity is a great program, and they are very engaged in the community. They have peers that are there that bridge out in the community with the peers. And I think that you were asking earlier regarding about what would help with the police department supporting Unity Hospital. I think that if they had a closer contact with the peers working at the hospital, to be able to contact them and be like, hey, we know you work with this person, you're supporting them. Hey, is there any way that we can connect with you to meet with them? They're in this crisis. I know there is crisis response out on there, but if there is someone that is already supporting the person that is in the hospital, that has that different connection with someone, and bridging that gap between the hospital, the peers, and the community, the police officers, having that connection with each other, that closes that gap, that bridges that community effort in there. And that kind of shares the responsibility for everybody, and that makes that really super mutual. And I believe that piece, what is missing, is basically bridging that gap in between the peers, the staff, and the officers being able to engage with each other. So thank you. I do want to put my shout out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. That's great
You're
information.
welcome.
Thank you so much, Walida, and it's such a great discussion. I think we can hear Malay's question, but that we have to leave it there. Yeah,
Can you
go ahead,
mute
Malay.
me? I'm sorry, I'm on this iPhone. It won't
Oh,
mute. I'm
sure,
sorry.
sure thing. Yep.
Really quick, I just wanted to know, Kyra, of the construction of the sobering, the construction of it, has it started? I want to know kind of what's the time frame of it. I love that she was stating of mentorship, having mentorships of different progressions of people, being able to talk to, because there's a human connection. There's a person who, when you go to clean classes and rehabilitation classes, I feel like that's just super important to have those different types of connections with people. What's the time frame of the constructions for both, for the safe space for the police officers, for people to come in to make that divide of the firearms, and also as well of the sobering construction for the rooms?
Yeah. So I have a tentative time frame, and I apologize, I didn't check on this before coming to this meeting, which I should have. My understanding is we're looking at like spring 2024, but also this is Portland construction. So I do expect there to be delays. We have already started. So we have already transitioned and started taking out some of the areas of the hospital. So what used to be our living room, which was our overflow space in the emergency department, has already been deconstructed. They've already moved the social workers and the providers to new offices because they're going to take down those walls any day. So this is happening. This is happening now. And what's nice is that the space that will allow for a better warm handoff with police officers actually doesn't require any construction. It is simply going to be in the space that is our current triage area. So we have our ambulance bay where people come in via ambulance or on holds, or if they're agitated, and then they come into what is our current triage area. That is being moved because it is a not well conceived structure, and we are completely redesigning it now that we know how this system works and how we can be better. And we are moving it closer to the emergency department. So the space that is already present is where potentially our security officer office is going to move, potentially, or it's just going to be an open space where we can meet with officers and future patients behind locked doors. Because that's the big thing, is we don't want to be doing handoffs in the cold outside. We want to be doing them inside, but I also can't have an officer bring a firearm into a space with other patients. And this is how we've been trying over the years to figure out how do we do this in a way that is compassionate to the person that we are trying to serve. The Sobering Center, I think, is going to open in spring 2024, but I will get back to Tia with an actual answer from somebody that is in those meetings, because that is just a guess.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's great. And also, nothing's perfect starting out. So I love that you had everyone has insight and is realizing the productiveness of it be counterproductive to keep it the same in the same area. So moving around of what is needed now. So I just think that's great, being more productive of the space. Thank you.
Okay. I love these segments. I'm so grateful for everything we learned just now, but there's never enough time for all of the questions and comments. And the hope is that these discussions will lead us into future work and engagement. And I personally am so glad that I learned about Unity tonight. But thank you so much for your time. And I think we'll have to leave it there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kyra. You can stay, you can go. We really appreciate your time. We'll follow up with you.
For sure.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so somewhat hard pivot. Well, you know, settlement agreement, it's all related, right? So we're gonna jump into a debrief on last Thursday's fairness hearing. For community members who are kind of new to the settlement agreement and some of the processes around that, we did put together a few slides giving an overview of what that was. And Ashley or Tia, I'm not sure who is taking the lead on these.
Yeah, I can run through the slides, but my understanding is that we'll sort of open this more up to sort of a discussion or Q&A.
Yes, absolutely. So we have just like a few primer slides for people who are coming in. They're like, what are you guys talking about? But then we are very lucky to be joined by some real experts on these issues. So we have the city attorney's office here with us and the DOJ who can really speak to our questions and you know, getting into the meat of this issue. So this is just a primer for the Q&A that we're going to get into.
Yep. So right. So what is a fairness hearing? And yeah, truth be told, I learned about it last Monday, perhaps in my own sort of, this came about pretty fast. And that, you know, we'll talk maybe about that later. But as you know, well, maybe as you know, some of you know, council had voted to make some amendments, so the fairness hearing is going to the judge who's been presiding over the settlement, Judge Michael Simon. So he heard from the city and the DOJ about making these amendments, or the city to make these amendments, and essentially, there's a couple changes that came down that felt like they were going to affect PCCEP. And, you know, I guess I won't get into the commentary, but I think as a PCCEP member, we were all sort of a little caught off guard about the possible changes in the fairness hearing sort of happening soon. But it sounds like it was a great hearing. I wasn't able to go because it kind of just got scheduled a little bit outside of being able to plan for it. But I know Celeste was able to attend, and she had read off a statement that PCCEP members had all signed on to as well. And I know some other folks were able to go from the committee. But ultimately, you know, so one of the things that was added was the independent monitor, which, as you may remember, earlier this year, PCCEP had made a recommendation to the mayor to adopt to bring an independent monitor. So that's kind of a good news. And then I think also there was the changes to self-monitoring changing parts of the settlement agreement into self-monitoring. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that. But there was parts of in those paragraphs where PCCEP was impacted, which will again we'll kind of get into a little bit more here with our discussion tonight. And then some other parts were to the self-monitored parts. I guess, yeah, they would remain, they'd be those new parts would be subject to termination from the settlement if they remain in compliance for a year. So again, I won't get too much in the commentary because I'm still very much learning about these nuances, but essentially, if you've gotten to a COCL report meeting, there'll be a lot of, if you've read the COCL, gone through the whole COCL, you'll see a lot of the in compliance, it's like the green, yellow, and red. So this essentially will kind of take some of that away, some of those parts that have already been sort of moving along smoothly enough. So it might, you know, again, it might actually end up being a good thing for PCCEP. And so we'll learn more about those changes. And yeah, I read about that article, you know, I read the article too, about Judge Simon's comments that it was a complex compromise, that he ended up approving the amendments and they were fair and reasonable. So that's where we are. And as Dory mentioned, I believe we have Heidi Brown from the city's attorney's office, and I believe Jonas from DOJ. Yeah, thanks. And I don't know if we have any of our amici friends here. But yeah, I would go to the initial discussion questions. Yeah. So I think these are the ones we were kind of floating around in PCEP's mind. And so, we definitely wanted it. That's, kind of why we took this meeting, our community engagement subcommittee time, to bring this up, because, it just happened. I know a lot of PCEP members also have some questions or some thoughts, and we wanted to make sure the public, as always, that's kind of the goal of the subcommittee, is making sure the community is connected to some of these changes going on in the settlement. So this felt like a great place to do a little debrief. Doria, were we thinking, I'm sorry if you told me this already, but were we thinking we'd start the discussion with just PCEP members first? Or should we let city attorney's office and the DOJ sort of have a
I think that maybe it would be helpful to hear because if I'm perceiving this correctly, I think there may still be a little bit of haziness around the actual events of the hearing. I'm wondering if we could ask Heidi and Jonas to sort of summarize just really quickly, like their understanding of sort of the changes. And then we could engage in a Q&A about that and kind of, see if there are a bunch of questions from PCEP, and then we'll figure out how to, sort that out as we go. Heidi and Jonas, does that work for you all?
It does. Heidi, do you want to go first?
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, that works great for me too. So if that sounds good, I'm happy to start. For those of you I don't know, my name is Heidi Brown. I'm with the city attorney's office, and I use she, her pronouns. And it's nice to see everyone tonight. I mean, if I was just to give a real broad overview of what we went through, I think Ashley did an excellent job of summarizing what is a fairness hearing, where the judge determines if we're making changes to the settlement agreement. Are those changes fair, reasonable, and adequate? That's the legal standard that they have to apply. And so that's and the judge, as Ashley said, decided that these amendments relating to a monitor were fair, reasonable, and adequate, and adopted them on last week on Thursday. And so I would say there's a number of things in several pages of the amendments, but in big picture, as folks probably know, the city is in a very unique settlement agreement with the Department of Justice, in that the Department of Justice acts as both the plaintiff and the monitor. And that is not common nationwide. And most of the time, the Department of Justice is a plaintiff, and ensuring that they feel that that a jurisdiction is complying with either a consent decree or, in our circumstance, a settlement agreement. But they're not at the same time monitoring and providing feedback on the city's or a jurisdiction's efforts at complying with the terms of the settlement agreement, and monitoring how they're doing. And so what this did, the first thing this did, is to separate out that role for DOJ. So they'll now remain as the plaintiff, but we will be in the process of hiring an independent monitor. And that's a person or a team of people, and I would expect it to be a team of people with expertise in this area, who will be looking to see whether the city is meeting its requirements under the settlement agreement, offering technical assistance and advice to us on how we can do that better, and areas where we need support. And we have a whole process for how that goes about, how we hire a monitor. And I saw that was in one of the questions that you had, is how the monitor will be selected. And there's a process we'll go through where the city will post a request for proposals. And what's going to be in that request is something we'll work on with DOJ. And then And then we will go through a process of narrowing it down to 3 finalists. And in that process of narrowing it down, there will be the AMAC will be involved in providing their input into their thoughts about the proposals. The Mental Health Alliance will be providing their input. The Portland Police Association, as a third-party intervener, will also be giving their input. And then PCCEP was also included in that. So there'll be representatives, 1 representative from each of those entities, providing feedback to the DOJ and the city on the various proposals. And then if we interview monitor teams in trying to select 3 finalists to consider, then they will also be in the interview processes with us, and again, providing feedback. Once 3 finalists are selected, then we have 32 days for public input. And during that 32 days, we'll host a town hall where you all and the public generally will get to have an opportunity to meet the finalists and the monitors and the teams that are seeking to be the City of Portland's monitor, and have an opportunity for questions and to provide then input and your thoughts about the various monitors and their strengths and weaknesses. So that's, and then once we hire a monitor, then they will take over that role from the Department of Justice. And the second big thing that happens under these changes is that we terminated certain paragraphs in the settlement agreement, and that went into effect last week when the judge adopted the amendments. And the standard that the parties had agreed on between the Department of Justice and the city, and also with a lot of input from the amici and the PPA, was that we looked at the areas where the DOJ had found the city in substantial compliance for the last 3 assessments. So the DOJ does annual assessments on the city to assess their compliance. So if we had been in green and therefore in substantial compliance for the last 3 years, and really actually, if you go back 1 more year, because in early 2020, before COVID, before the murder of George Floyd and before the protests, the city had been found in substantial compliance on everything. So arguably then the last 4 compliance reports, the city was in substantial compliance on these paragraphs. And we agreed that those would be terminated right away. So we had demonstrated to the Department of Justice and to the community and to the court that the city had made systemic changes that were durable and lasting. And so the agreement was that then the city is able to carry those systems forward themselves. We also looked at where were the areas where the city had been in substantial compliance, but not for as long of a period of time. And for those where we'd shown it for a little while, but not quite as long as three years, we agreed that those would go into self-monitoring right away. And that's the other provision that we agreed on was self-monitoring. And what self-monitoring is, that the city will have to come up with a self-monitoring plan, and the DOJ will review it and give their thoughts. And then the monitor will also provide feedback on the self-monitoring plan. And then the city will monitor its compliance with those provisions, those paragraphs that have gone into, that are in self-monitoring. And so and while we're doing that, the monitor, the independent monitor that we'll be hiring, will be monitoring how well we're doing in monitoring ourselves. So there will be that oversight of our self-monitoring to ensure that we're doing it in a way that continues substantial compliance with the paragraphs under the settlement agreement. We have to show that we're in substantial compliance for 2 self-monitoring periods of 6 months each. And at the end of that, if the city is able to show that we've been able to maintain substantial compliance via self-monitoring for those 2 periods, then the city and DOJ, if they agree, can file a motion with a court to terminate any provisions that we've been able to demonstrate that over that period of time. And so not only are there paragraphs that have gone into immediate self-monitoring, but we also have a provision that going forward, when the independent monitor decides that or assesses the city and says you've been in substantial compliance for 2 6-month periods, so for 1 year total consecutive, that grouping of paragraphs will go into self-monitoring. And then we'd have again, so like 2 more 6-month periods for us to show that we're able to monitor ourselves and ensure that we're staying consistent with our practices. So basically, if there's for those number of paragraphs, there's several paragraphs that are still in the settlement agreement. And for those, it'll be a 2-year process for us to get to where we would look at potential termination. For any provision that is going to be considered to be terminated going forward, so it wouldn't be any if it's terminated, it's no longer under the jurisdiction of the court. For those provisions, there will be the court can hold a hearing if the judge wants to determine, has the city reached substantial compliance and is it appropriate to terminate this provision. I think that's, for me, that's like the big picture summary of what the settlement agreement does as far as appoints, we're adopting an independent monitor approach and separating out DOJ. We had some provisions that were immediately terminated. We created this self-monitoring process with oversight from the monitor. And then we have a way to, as we show that we're continuing with making further systemic changes that are durable and we've been able to maintain for enough time, that then we have a provision that those sections can also get terminated.
That's great, Heidi. You mind if I pick up there?
I was just going to say, Jonas, do you want to jump in and add anything or take on?
Please, Dory's okay? Great, thank you. So I'll add to the chat. That's the basic breakdown that I think Heidi described. It's a little oversimplification, but it's 1, 2, and 3. The dismissal, the self-monitoring under the court monitor's assistance, and then the continued monitoring of 55 provisions. So I think there were 3 big things to take away for PCCEP. 1, we don't know who the monitor is yet. There's a selection process that has heavy community involvement, including PCCEP. 2, Dr. Christoph is still the COCL. So long as we don't have a monitor appointed by the court, there's still a COCL in place, and that COCL still does quarterly reporting along the same lines as before, but for the 55 active provisions of the settlement agreement. And 3 is PCCEP's not going away. I think we heard this concern last week in court. It was, is PCCEP going away? No, it's not. The provisions for what is currently in paragraphs 141 through 144 and 151 through 152 that relate to PCCEP are going to self-monitor. That doesn't mean they're going away. Even if those provisions are ultimately dismissed, PCCEP doesn't go away. In the new provisions, paragraphs 205, 206, 207, 209, 227, 228, and 230, all of those require PCCEP participation. That means in order for the city to comply with those new provisions, PCCEP has to exist. So PCCEP can't go away as long as those provisions are still active in the settlement agreement in this case. I wanted to give you that assurance and let you know that I think both parties, and I won't try to speak for the city, but I'll say for DOJ, I'm sure the city feels the same way. We value PCCEP and we value the volunteers' time here. This wasn't to undercut PCCEP. This was a glide path forward to a step where the city develops the capacity to do its own self-evaluation. We reward where there's been some sustained substantial compliance for more than 3 years. The provisions have been dismissed. And we keep in the sticky wickets, the hard ones to get. Use of force review and accountability are chief among those. But there are hard ones to accomplish, and those are still part of the 55 that are left. And I don't want to talk anymore. Let's take questions, if that's okay with you, Dory.
Yeah, thank you both so much for that. I think at this time, let's open it up to PCEP members first for your questions. Any comments or questions you have for Heidi and Jonas?
Yeah, Tia.
I wanted to know how much weight the PCEP members and the list of organizations you listed has as far as our questions during the town hall.
Well, I mean, so two separate things, because the PCEP representative and the amici's representatives and the PPA's representatives, they will look over the proposals and provide input into who should be finalists. And to the extent we do interviews, they will be present at those interviews and offer their comments on the candidates. And I put that in the chat. They will provide input. The final decision is with the DOJ and the city as far as who the three finalists should be, but we're receiving input. Similarly, we will publicly announce the three finalists after receiving that input and considering everything. And then we'll have the public town hall forum where the three finalists will present to the public and have a space for you folks to ask questions, and we'll be there listening along with you. And then there'll be that 32 days is a public comment period. So during that time, we'll probably set up an email address that will go to the council office staffs who've been working on this along with our office, and then also DOJ to receive that community public feedback on the candidates. Does that answer your question, Tia?
Yes. Yes.
As far I think you asked me how much weight. I mean, yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. I mean, I think we'll give all of the input serious consideration, because this is important for us to hear what folks think and how they feel about the various candidates and their strengths and weaknesses. So that's what we're hoping to hear from, are the things that community members and all of you observe in the various candidates, and what do you feel is helpful to you as community in building these relationships.
Thank you, Heidi. Any other follow-up questions, Tia?
No.
Okay, wonderful. We now have Kip. Kip, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Hang on one second. I'm still working off my mobile, so my apologies. So I finally did get home. One of the questions I had that did not get addressed yet is, I'm pretty new to PCEP, and my understanding is that the advocacy for the independent monitor was decided several months ago, and I agree. I think it's a great thing. Judge Simon had mentioned that in the entire proposal, though, he didn't have the opportunity to approve one thing and reject another. My biggest concern is that you had just been mentioning that the community input is a critical path to all of these things. However, the recommendation to the DOJ was made in a very quick time frame without us on PCEP having the ability to understand what the recommendations were, why there was some of the confusion on the existence of PCEP beyond this, and also to gather community feedback on the self-monitoring and the severance part. I believe there are 5 business days from the time it was presented to the actual fairness hearing, and that doesn't feel equitable or transparent from my perspective. And I have one follow-on question to that.
sorry, Teresa.
No, go ahead, Heidi.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know if Stephanie Howard wants to speak to this, but yeah, she's raising her hand. Is that okay? Can I turn it over to her?
Absolutely, thank you. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, hi, and I'm really glad that you brought this up, Kip, because I wanted to say something to just take responsibility for you know, a lot of the lack of communication around this. When the proposed amendments were finalized, that was on November 2nd. And I sent those to all of the PCEP members, but this just shows how much I take Dory for granted and how much I take Sarah Ames for granted, honestly. I didn't do anything to try to help you understand what that meant. And that is entirely something that I take responsibility for. November was a weird month with you know, with staffing and things like that, but that's where I should have taken up some of that slack, because just sending it to you is not enough. And I really apologize for that completely. I think I was so focused on, ooh, let me just get this to them, because this is, you know, I want them to hear this directly from us and from the mayor's office, not in the news, because this is directly related to one of their recommendations. And so in my hurry to do that, I did a very poor job of trying to help ensure that it was understood, or to, you know, try to schedule some time so that we could meet and talk through what this meant, but in advance of the hearing on the 30th. So I do just want to say that is, you know, I take full responsibility for that, and I'm really sorry that that's how that happened.
And I would just echo that for our office, that, you know, similar apologies for not finding a way to ensure that we were able to meet with you after Stephanie sent it out. You know, as soon as we all had agreement, which was on November 2nd, Stephanie did send it right out. But we should have followed up, and I apologize on our end too. And we'll be sure to be more careful going forward. Stephanie and our office already had these conversations about that. We felt like we didn't do this well. And so my apologies as well for us not also being sure to reach out and be sure that we met with you all and talk it through, because it's a huge document.
Well, I absolutely appreciate that. And I guess our ability to understand it, and then having time to schedule a meeting to get community input like we're doing right now, I think is a critical part of the process. And that's more so what I feel challenged with how the process went down. And I understand the timeframes in my perspective were very short. Maybe they were a couple weeks longer, but that again didn't give us enough time to actually schedule time for community input and make recommendations based on that. And that's the part of the job of being a volunteer on this that I take extremely seriously. So I just want to make that really clear. It's not about the outcome. It's about making sure that we have time to talk about what's going to happen, get people to come join us, have time to join us, and gather their feedback so that we can do our jobs well. The other question I have is, well, so on that point, I hope going forward, there'll be ample time for this process to work the way it's intended to. The other question I have is, I'm a little unclear on the actual timelines to get out the RFP for the independent monitor. I heard a response time once we have an RFP out of 32 days to evaluate and get down to 3 candidates. But I thought I read originally that from the day the RFP is announced to the time that we're going to start or close that window was, I believe, 15 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Kip, we had 15 days from the date that the court adopted the amendments, which was last Thursday. So within 15 days of last Thursday, the DOJ and the city need to agree on the terms of what will be included in this request for proposal. And then within
Okay.
15 days of that agreement, we have to actually post it. So I suppose, you know, but so the 15
Okay.
days DOJ and city have to agree is up next week. And I think, you know, hopefully we can get it posted. And then once it's posted, I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's posted and by the end of 60 days, the parties have to select 3 finalists. And then from that end of that 60 days, 32 days public comment period on the 3 finalists. So we'll announce the 3 finalists. And then we have 32 days to both hold a town hall and receive public comment and feedback. And then I have
Okay,
to
that
look
makes
up
more
how much
sense to
time we
me.
have after that to actually select. And I'm sorry, within 30 days of the close of the public comment period, the parties will jointly select a candidate for the court to appoint as a monitor. So,
Okay, cool. So it's incumbent upon us to make sure we set time now in the near future for that commentary. So, okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kip. Dory?
Yeah, so I have a question and then potentially a request to the city and DOJ. So I think there are maybe questions about whether or not so the city and the DOJ were in mediation to reach this agreement that resulted in amendments to the settlement agreement. I think there are questions about whether after the mediation result was reached, could there have been community input on that product? I think that's a question that people have that has been raised to me.
Yes, thank you for articulating what I was thinking much better than I said.
And I think so. I think, like, you know, because PCCEP, we do a lot of community input, but we also do a lot of education about processes that are happening, like, you know, at the city and with DOJ, and kind of where we are in the process with those things. And there are some portions that are absolutely open for input and windows where this can happen, and there are some parts where it can't. It's more about transparency, education to the community, that kind of thing. So I'm hoping, my question is in service of getting clarity around what part of the process was the post mediation.
So I want to defer to Jonas as well on this, but when we're in mediation and exchanging proposals, those are mediation proposals and they are confidential and covered under that process. And so part of that it is for, if we say, well, we think we're okay with this, the mediation isn't technically done until DOJ, and he needs to get approval up their chain. So Jonas and his folks may think, oh, this is probably a good idea. And Jonas, I'm not trying to speak for you, so just jump on in at any point. But I think they say, well, we think this is a good idea, but we have to run it up our chain. For us, you know, on the city side, you know, as soon as we were able to, as soon as we heard back from DOJ and they had the approval up their chain, we released it. And then we also set the hearing, and we're able to release the document that council was going to consider that following week.
Jonas, did you want to add?
Well, yeah, I'd like to add that we were on a compressed schedule in part because we're trying to meet the court's available calendar date. So November 3rd, we had authorization to file. So the city, with our consent, released the document even sooner to put on the agenda. But the final authorization to file that motion with the court was the 3rd of November. So that was the first opportunity for us to say publicly, here's the document, DOJ agrees to it. And the 30th was a date where Judge Simon had set aside, it will be a fairness hearing, but then it was going to be a status conference with the opportunity to revert that to a fairness hearing. Hence the rush date. But I think the important lesson learned here is let's look at the document right now, and it says that there's 32 days for the comment period after the selection of the 3 candidates. Let's make sure that we all know what those 32 days are. So there's a PCEP meeting in that 32 days. And planning going forward, that helps us not have any unforced errors and listen to one another on this.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, because I think, I think some of the frustration that came out around the process, and you've heard it for sure, but, I think just transparency, and sometimes, if things are not subject to comment or input at that time, that's really helpful to know too, right? Because we understand there are portions of the process where that might not be the case. But, I think, having that notice and consideration is what I'm hearing loud and clear from members. And so I just wanted to get a little more clarity on that. So I appreciate your responses. Thanks.
Thanks, Dory. Now we have Pastor Weiser. Go ahead, Pastor.
Thank you very much, and great discussions and questions from everyone. I guess what I'm going to say, I guess if there's some ownership that's going around of where that information got kind of rushed out, I guess being an old man in this, I think Dan and me, we had a conversation the other day, probably the oldest on the language. I'm looking at a 2010 document that is where that we have drawn the ideal of what we were looking for out of the agreement in 2010. When I seen what came out, which is something I've been following probably longer than 2010, because I'm looking at 1998 documents as well, it was easy for me to kind of say where we were, what I needed to hear and what I needed to know. So I know that even from hearing Dr. Haynes and Mr. Handelman and others say, we're looking at a whole new regime of new people who are following through this process. And I do believe that we all are trying to get caught up to the language, but everything is on a slow train. But when these agreements came, if I'm understanding, reading the settlement agreement of how that the information is kept in negotiation with the lawyers and AMA and amici, and those who are at that table, then the information comes to what we are here. And I do understand the ideal of transparency because I've been a part of that for a long time in my fight, but also would like to say to our group is that we weren't, I was not going to sleep on it. I'm a part of our PCCEP group. And one of the things that I was doing was keeping up with pretty much what was going on. So I want to let us know, those who are just now trying to say where we are and are we moving in the way. Thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this group, because it's been dear to my heart for a very, very long time.
Thank you.
May I respond very briefly? I'm sorry, Teresa.
Go ahead, Jonas. No.
Thank you. Pastor Wiseman, you made mention of 1998, and just in case there's any confusion with the old PIAC recommendations from back then, or the IPR that was initially created, I know you mentioned the original director. There was confusion during the hearing on the 30th. Many speakers believed that we were talking about amendments to the accountability system for PPB, the PAC recommendations, and Section 8 of the settlement agreement. And that wasn't where we were going at the hearing, as you heard when you were there. So for any of those individuals tonight who were not at the hearing or didn't get the word on it, Section 8 of the settlement agreement is still subject to later amendment. And that will be down the road after the city PPA and PPCOA, the two unions for officers, negotiate their processes for accountability and then bring that back to DOJ. You've already seen the city's proposal in the city council hearing on the Section 8 amendments and the city code changes. And if this group wants to contribute to that discussion now, I think there's time, right? You have the documents because the city's already put them out there. And so by all means, step forward, offer comments to the city and to DOJ. We want to hear them too, right? We're a party to it. We're part of the fairness hearing. We want to know what PCCEP has to say as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonas. I hope we consider that as a group.
Thank you so much, Pastor Weisner. Do we have any other members who have any questions or comments? I want to be mindful of our agenda. Dory, I think we're in that break time. Do you want to take a break and then come back and then open it up to the public? Or do you want to continue?
Let's continue on, and if anyone needs a break, please feel free to step away. PCEP members, any more questions from the group at this time? Otherwise, we'll open it up to the public for questions. All right, I think we can hand it over to Dan.
Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the group Portland Cop Watch. I was also on the Police Accountability Commission, and I'm also a member of the steering committee of the AMA Coalition for Justice and Police Reform, but I'm speaking today as a member of Portland Cop Watch. This is kind of a list of comments, and I'm hoping that people can respond as they see fit, because I'm not really asking questions. The 5-day window, I think that one of the PCCEP members was referring to, was between the time that the public got a copy of the amendments and the time the city council hearing was held, which was between 2 Wednesdays. Now, the first Wednesday, which was November 1st, PCCEP canceled this meeting, and then the information came out the next day. Apparently, was emailed to you before we saw it on the city council agenda on Friday. And then the hearing happened Wednesday morning, the 8th, before your meeting. So this entire process happened in between PCCEP meetings. And I just think that is kind of indicative of, we get a lot of these apologies for leaving the community out, and it just keeps happening over and over again. There's not enough time for the community to review these things. The monitor is not getting a full copy of the settlement agreement that they're going to have to review when they get this RFP, because, as Mr. Geisler was hinting at, there's still amendments to Section 8 that haven't been approved yet. So they don't even know what the content is of what they're supposed to be approving of or not. And I appreciate that there were people who were confused about whether or not the judge was hearing amendments to Section 8 that have to do with the oversight system, the amendments that were introduced at the same time as the code that was related to the new oversight system. But those amendments to the Section 8 were never talked about at City Council on the 15th of November. They were not talked about Monday night at a meeting between the former PAC members and members of the city government, and they're still not being talked about now. I'm glad too that Mr. Geisler invited input on that, but the court and the parties who are here heard from multiple people, including the AMAC, the League of Women Voters, and the Portland Cop Watch, among others, that pointed out that some of the paragraphs that got dismissed have to do with the oversight system, and it's going to affect the future amendments and the future oversight system. So there was no confusion among some of us about that, and that was dismissed, and that it was said to the judge that there was not, those comments weren't relevant, and I really felt that was dismissive and inappropriate. The PCCEP's concern about being dismissed from the settlement agreement is, so it may be premature, but it is well founded. And here's what I mean by this: that you just heard that once it's dismissed from the settlement agreement, that there's no obligation anymore for the city to do anything. They've been telling you for 3 years they're going to put you into the city code, and that still hasn't happened. The Community Oversight Advisory Board, which was your preceder, was just disbanded, even though it was part of the settlement agreement. And then it took 1.5 years to create the PCCEP. So while it may have been a little premature for you to say, oh, we're afraid we're going to be going away, I've been saying this is like the polar ice caps. Right now you can say the polar ice caps are melting. Well, they're still there, so we don't have to worry about it. Well, you know what? They're not going to be there at some point, and that's going to be of concern. So I think the PCCEP is right to be concerned about being dismissed summarily at some point down the line, and you should keep pushing to make sure that you get it embedded in city code so that won't happen. I guess my last point is about the community input that went into the selection of the first compliance officer, the first compliance officer in 2014, where there were 3 candidates. 2 were local and 1 was from out of town. And the people in the community said, we like the 2 people from in town. We really don't want the person from out of town. And the city chose the person from out of town. So, I'm hoping that they're being sincere when they say that they're going to take community input seriously this time, but just historically, that's not what happened. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Did you want to respond, Jonas or Heidi?
If I could respond briefly on the accountability provisions. So we dismissed, and among the 40 paragraphs dismissed, 130, which has to do with retaliation. The city has in place, and we've sampled the actual investigations. Policy 310.20, discrimination, harassment, and retaliation prohibited. In fact, they've enforced that where they had I think a poor outcome in a prior investigation. They settled this past year and remediated the prior poor investigation. And they have HRIR 2.02, prohibition against workplace harassment, discrimination, retaliation. So 130, they've shown the compliance record. We dismissed 134 through 135, which are the CRC appeals. If the PAC's recommendation goes forward in any form like it's recommended now, that is the community hearing right there. But for the last 2 years, people generally have not taken advantage of any CRC appeals. In the current city proposal, paragraph 35D.05, 35D.05 is the section, paragraph 2D1, there's a case handling appeal on the front end. So there is an appeal process in there already. And then we dismissed 138 through 140, communication with complainants. In the new proposal, there's section 4-301, which is a complaint navigator. Currently, the same communications that were in place with complainants before is still in place. IPR still has it. If the new system comes to fruition under the current proposal, it'll also have a complaint navigator. If it doesn't come to fruition under that proposal, we can create the complaint navigator or any sort of communication that is necessary going forward for an effective communication system with complainants. I think that addresses the accountability provisions dismissed.
And if I could briefly, Teresa, on the just on PCCEP and the statement that folks should be concerned that PCCEP might go away, even if the paragraph requiring the city to have PCCEP goes away, the settlement agreement still has several sections that we inserted under these new amendments. So they weren't there before, but they're new, that reference the PCCEP providing input to the monitor. So until the monitor's gone, until the whole settlement agreement is gone, the PCCEP will be required. I also have always heard an interest of council in adopting an ordinance. And I think there's just been some changeover and some changeover in PCCEP, and I think it'd be a wonderful thing for this. I'd love for all of you to consider what an ordinance, what you might want to look like. I know Sarah Ames was just talking to me the other day about wanting to discuss that with all of you and help put something together for council to consider to put PCCEP into ordinance. I think there's a real interest in council in doing that.
And I'll just jump in. Sorry, just to say, I think we are ready to codify PCCEP. I think Sarah actually just recirculated some additional language for consideration. We just want to do that in cooperation with you. We don't want to, we want to do that with your input on when and how, and want to make sure that we're not just bulldozing that through when you may or may not be ready, but we're ready when you are.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Jonas. Okay, we'll go next to Celeste. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm going to do something a little unusual here. I know you've addressed aspects of this, and I'm going to cut across silos, so to speak, to ask one of the questions that is the actual elephant in the room. And that is, we are aware that there are provisions within the amendments to the settlement agreement that will ensure the existence of PCCEP. And we know that there are, we just heard that there are efforts afoot to codify the work that PCCEP does. But I think the elephant in the room question really is what type of what kind of authority and for want of a more nuanced word. What type of leverage will whatever comes after PCEP, what type of leverage will there be to get the same type of responses we get now? We have the mandate to leverage answers within a short amount of time. We have the leverage to make changes to policy. We have the leverage to, I guess, ask for amendments or clarification. And codification does not necessarily bring those protections. So just to say it bluntly in plain language, what kind of guarantees do we have that whatever body that will come after PCEP will have the authority and the power to require the kinds of responses we get now? And that's really the question I think a lot of the public wants to hear. And I know you've already answered this in pieces, but I think it's really helpful for us to hear it, a cogent response to that question phrased that way.
Thanks.
And that would go to like Heidi and Jonas specifically, but anyone else, Stephanie, who want to join in.
Yeah, I think, and what I understand you're asking about, Celeste, is once we fully complied with the settlement agreement and it doesn't exist anymore, what's the guarantee after that? And I guess, at least from the legal end of things, what I would say is if there's an ordinance that requires the city in our new form of government, we'll have a city administrator or the mayor or whatever the ordinance requires, the code language. So where we adopt PCEP into code, whatever's required in there is what will be required to happen, because it will be in city code. So I would say that as you're working through what you'd like to see, as Stephanie said, that she's interested in working with all of you on what you'd like to see in city code and what you want in an ordinance. I think that that's the place where you want to include some requirements on timing. And can I just say your kitty is really cute, and thank you for letting me smile.
Well, I actually don't have a choice. He will climb up me if I don't pick him up. But thank you very much for the answer.
Thanks.
Jonas, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
There's nothing that I can add to that. Once the settlement is finally completely dismissed, DOJ's role ends. So if there's an interest in memorializing in city code PCEP, now's the time to do it.
Thank you.
Stephanie, any thoughts?
No, I think that is exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to have in our discussion. Because yeah, agreed. What's in city code is what will be required and what will give the authority. So we're absolutely open to discussing that with you at any time. We can talk about it on Friday.
Great, thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Celeste. Next, we have Ashley. Go ahead, Ashley.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of my question was answered. I'm glad this topic of codifying PCEP has come up. I wasn't sure if this would or not, but it does make sense that it did. And so I am happy that, Heidi, like you said, there's this, there's sort of like an open door at the moment to start talking about it. And so I guess it's my question, and maybe, just like, how do we, how do we start that? Is that, do we start that in a PCEP setting? Is that a conversation on Friday between the co-chairs and the mayor's office? And, Doria, I don't know if you've had any thoughts on this, but how does this plug into like being part of, something that PCEP can make sure that we're advocating for? Because I think, like Celeste said, I think this is something that the public is really concerned about. We understand at the moment PCEP is not going away, which I think we can walk away knowing that, but it feels like we're getting closer and closer to this settlement being sort of settled. And as we know, creating city code is probably, a lot harder than it sounds, and just, giving us time and making sure that we're doing this properly. So yeah, Doria, I see your hand up, so I will maybe have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just want to give Stephanie and Sarah Ames, the city attorney who works with us, some credit that they have been extremely willing to work with staff and PCCEP on this, really just like whenever you all are ready to take it up. I think it is not, there are really no barriers in terms of initiating the process. I think it's going to be more about the work on PCCEP's end to start thinking about what you want to see in that language, and what is important to you to codify. So that's where we are. I think could be a smooth, well, you know, I mean, I should never say that. I don't want to jinx myself, but I think they're willing to work with you at any point.
And the only thing I'd add to that is that I can't recall, and I apologize, but I think Sarah had some, there was some draft language from a while ago that maybe even Anika Ben-Dalbert had started before Sarah took over. And then Sarah worked on it a little bit. But so if you want, like, you know, what was drafted before, you can use that to start. You don't have to, you can do however you want to do it. I just wanted to offer that to you if that's helpful.
Great, thank you, Heidi. That's a great suggestion. Next we have Pastor Weisner.
Thank you again. I was going to say to the PCCEP group in its areas of where we are in the conversation, as Celeste had used, again, the meetings we have been consistent in what we've been hearing tonight about qualifying it. In the last couple of meetings, I believe, Celeste, we have spoke about that with the mayor. What I know happens, just like as long as I've been doing this, documentation, as Heidi has just mentioned, is so important. From the beginning of the time that we started this rethinking with the re-engagement with the mayor and the ideal of where he was going, how he saw it, I think we have had meetings, we've talked about it, but we were the new group again now. So with that, we're needing to actually continue probably somewhere along the line in our moving forward, like the last group moved forward, is to start, and I think Dory, you and I and Celeste have already started speaking on how do we see where PCCEP is at and going for the future and probably the next meeting after. But it is something that is needing to actually make sure that the community is clear when questions are coming, like tonight, that we have had these discussions and we are moving the vehicle where we need to go. Again, I'm being an old man in this thing again, and I'm like you, Celeste. I'm going to look for a retirement place somewhere, but the young, let them ride. Dan, you should know that. I think you had more hair and it was grayer, greener, or browner at that time. So thank you again for my comments. And Jonas, again, where you were at with the comment that you made on accountability, I thank you for clarifying that as well, even though it's still kind of in the questions of a lot of people's mind. But it was definitely clear in my head.
Great, thank you so much, Pastor Weisner. Any other comments or questions from the public? We're still taking or creating space for you all. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't want to take up more space in this part of the meeting. I do want to have some comments in the open public comment as well, but I just want to, I don't want to leave the conversation about the new oversight system where it was left, because there are some nuances that I'm going to have to talk about with Mr. Geisler. I offered to do so in a private chat, but that I really want to talk to PCCEP about when you have the time to dig into those agreements. Now, the deadline for commenting on what the city proposed to change the PAC's proposal is the 15th. So that is in a very short time from now. And I don't know if you have had or will have time to put some comments in based on your previous support of PAC, but be happy to talk with people about that whenever you want, and or could also even round up some of the former members PAC if that's helpful. But just generally speaking, the concept of the complaint navigator is not the same as what was being pulled out about the IPR. The IPR is supposed to communicate with the complainant throughout the process about what's going on with their case, and the complaint navigator is just supposed to be explaining to them what the steps are and how things are progressing. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the information about what's going on that's supposed to be relayed back to the complainant. The issue about the appeal happening at the beginning of near the beginning of the process, the way the city's envisioned it right now is at that point in the process, the person will not have a complaint navigator. So there are a lot of things that really need to be hashed out still. And at the meeting on Monday, the city said they were going to go back and talk more about what PAC had planned, and I'm hoping that they might be open to another meeting to talk about more of this kind of detail. Where I think there might be some misunderstanding about what PAC wrote, and there's certainly a lot of parts of what the city wrote that need further explanation. So I appreciate all of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, we'll go next to Babs Vanelli.
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
First, I want to say to co-chair Pastor Wisner, I am also 75 years old and so a senior, and have gotten politically active again in the last 3 or 4 years. Just as our city, my beloved city of Portland.
Babs, Babs, you're quite muffled. Any chance you can address that? We want to hear you.
Oh, okay. That's why I asked if you could hear me. My iPad is sometimes temperamental.
There we go.
Better now.
Oh, okay. I moved.
Oh, great.
Okay. So bottom line is I've lived in Portland my whole life. And I am one of those people who proudly says I love my city of roses. However, over the last 20 years, I've been saddened by what's happened in my city of roses. So I have followed closely all that's happened since Measure 26-217 was passed in November of 2020, and more specifically in the last couple of years. So I do want to say that I did follow the Police Accountability Commission, and I supported their final recommendation, which was presented to the mayor and city council on September 21st of 2023. So much has happened since then. And I am just wanting to appeal to all of you to look back, review if you need to, what was recommended after over 2 years of work, volunteer work, by the Police Accountability Commission. And whatever's happening now, honestly, my poor little brain is about ready to explode at trying to follow everything that's happened since, November 1st, Veterans Day weekend, November 15th, and now. I will continue to zoom into these meetings. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, PCCEP members, for your part in all of this. And the most important thing, in my humble opinion, is never give up. Keep fighting for what you believe in, no matter what happens. Okay? Thank you so much for listening to an old lady. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Babs. Great advice. Any other comments? I see Pastor Wisner, he raised his hand. We want to make sure other folks get a chance to speak if they haven't so yet.
I didn't know if that was something I missed with my name in there, but I wanted to applaud her for her comment, as well as Dan. Again, a lot of the working elements that are going into this very important, like her. And I've always said, you don't want to be in the club that we're in here from these many years of pain and trauma. But it does require us as a community, as quoted from Dr. King, the beloved, to be able to build and help, to be able to be a part of. And I may be a little tired, but my rest day will come where that one day in this city, I will be enough proud to know that another person won't be harmed. And the work that we're putting in today will be the everlasting beloved community that has always been hoped for, leading out of the city of Roses. Because again, as everyone has heard, this is a unique position, even Dan has said, for what we are doing with the accountability, as well as with this settlement agreement, and all of those who have gone on that I have worked dearly with to uphold this view that they have fought so hard for. That's my last comment, hopefully for the night.
Thank you, Pastor Weisner. Babs, did you have another comment? I see your hand up.
No, sorry.
No worries. Dory, I don't see any other hands up from the public or from our members. Do you want to continue with open public comment and move forward, or give folks a minute or two?
Yeah, anything else before we move to the ending portion of the meeting, all? Any other comments about the settlement, the monitor, etc.? Obviously, lots to come on these subjects. I think also some topics kind of being reinforced that PCCEP has already been sort of working on and interested over the course of this discussion, some threads to kind of pick up on. So great stuff coming out of this for sure.
Dory?
Yep.
In that language there, the biggest part of where that I heard, and if Heidi may like to address in the meeting that we had the other night, is and Dan and I had a conversation as well, but looking forward to the next community hope input in what Dan made the request from the PAC group, is that the PAC, the oversight, the community board will have the authority with discipline on the conduct of misconduct. So I wanted the group to have, if they have not heard that language, to kind of grasp toward what PAC thought of in there. And then maybe if there's more questions, Dan could probably ask out of that.
Thanks, Pastor Weisner. I think Pastor Weisner is asking Dan if you wanted to add some comments to what he just mentioned in respect to accountability and
well, no, it was more so of the language of how that the group will have the discipline.
Yes, thank you for that.
And then from there, if there was comments.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say that's right, that the biggest change that happened as a result of 26-217 was creating a board that makes final decisions about discipline. So we've never had that in Portland. We've had, IPR, PIAC, CRC, the Citizen Review Committee, but the final decision regarding discipline for allegations of misconduct for police officers and the decision about whether or not they actually violated a policy and engaged in misconduct has always rested with the chief, and the mayor has input on that as well. And under the charter amendments that were passed in 2020, there are a number of things that now this board will be making those decisions, whether or not misconduct occurred, and then the second issue of what's and imposing the discipline. So but that may be something you want to talk about at another meeting, because that's probably a lot more involved. But that is, no matter under any scenario, that's the charter provision. Those things that are under the board's jurisdiction, they will have that full decision-making authority.
Thank you, Heidi, for clarifying that, and thank you, Robin Weisner, for bringing Pastor Weisner for bringing that up. I think Dory's and shaking her head that could be a conversation for a later date, so we can expand and further discuss. Any other, oh, Adelia, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring up some news I just saw about an incident that happened this morning, and that a Portland police officer shot and killed someone in Northeast Portland this morning. And so I just wanted to like name that and recognize it here to make people aware of it, and also just like recognize how important this work is and accountability is. And right now, those officers, there were 2 involved, are on paid administrative leave. And yeah, I think that just highlights the importance of the Police Accountability Commission's like initial recommendations and the comments made on Monday. So I just wanted to bring that here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adelia.
Yeah, thank you for centering that, Odelia. That's really important to name in this space as we think about the stuff we work on and all of the, details of making the meetings run and, all of this stuff. That's really why we're all here.
That's right. Yeah, so let's transition into open public comments. So anything you all want to talk about or bring up? I know, Dan, you mentioned you had some things you wanted to discuss, but let's quickly go over open public comment. Do you have any comments about items discussed today? What would you like to see PCCEP work on next, and anything else? So let's go ahead and I'll hand it over to you, Dan, since you mentioned you had some things you wanted to discuss, and I don't see other hands raised.
That was an important factor because I was waiting to raise my hand, so I'll see if anybody else is raising their hand. Thank you very much. I'm glad that one of your members now brought up the shooting that happened this morning. I actually put it in the chat at the very beginning of the meeting when not everybody was here yet. And the first chairperson of the PCCEP, Lackawanna Drury, used to always bring those up as something to help ground everybody in what's really going on out in the street. So I really appreciate that that got brought up. Getting back to the Unity Center discussion, now I have to admit I was working on something else while it was going on, but my understanding of what I heard is that police officers are still entering the Unity Center with guns on, and that they're going to set up a separate room where the police can come in the future still wearing their guns, but they won't have to interact with the people who are already in the Unity Center. And this discussion has been going on for years and years. And I just looked at our analysis of the compliance officers report from last November, where officers were refusing to lock up their guns when they went to the mental health facility. And that what they said in that report is that the officers had a protocol to lock up their guns, but the bureau left a business card with a supervisor's number for the Unity Center people to call the supervisor whenever an officer refused to take their gun out. So it sounds like that never did get resolved, even though it's been going on. And it was allegedly, according to the compliance officer's report, there was a solution offered over a year ago. That's very troubling to me. For those of you who don't remember or didn't know, there was somebody who was shot in a mental health facility in 2001, Jose Mejia Pote, when the officers came into the mental health facility with their guns, and he was armed at first with a pencil, and the second time he grabbed a push bar off of one of the doors in the facility, and they shot and killed him. So this feels like we are not making very much progress. And just also, since this got brought up since the last time I talked, and now, if it's possible for PCCEP to talk about the PAC proposals and what the city's doing before that deadline on the 15th, I think it would be great. I'd also like to hear if the city's willing to extend that deadline so that more discussion can happen from groups like yours. And I didn't hear any consideration of whether there might be more discussion between PAC if it's possible to address that tonight, I'd really like to hear that. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Dan. Any responses, Heidi?
Yeah, I can just say, I mean, as far as the request and an extension that we just had the meeting Monday night, and so we haven't had a chance to talk, council staff and our office as a group. So we don't have a response yet, and I'm sorry for that, but hope to have one soon.
Thank you. I did want to just pose a comment that I know the PCCEP members are very focused on diversifying and being really inclusive of community into these meetings. And this Unity Center that everybody's saying is definitely was such a great opportunity to hear from them. I'm just curious to know how they deal with non-English speaking community members. I think that that's something that I think is really interesting when we serve folks in our communities in respect to mental and behavioral health. So just wanted to bring that up because I, as a former legislator, I worked on some of these policies, and I know that was something that I have brought up at the legislature, ensuring that we communicate in multiple languages. And I assuming that Unity Center does also, it just wasn't mentioned. And I just wanted to bring this up because I know that's important to our committee members. Pastor Weisner, did you have your hands up?
Yes, I was going to piggyback, and Teresa, thank you again for being a part of that, as well as the history of what Dan spoke of, because the way Mihia Poot got killed was just short change on the bus. That's all he didn't have and wound up there. The groups, and I want to again acknowledge Tia as well as Ashley for having such a great group here. One of the things that, since we're piggyback from where I didn't have time to comment on the last session period, I am now going through their peer support with the folk time training, and the extensiveness of that leads to what we're talking about now with Mihia Poot about how you're engaging in a medical facility. I happen to be at a facility, and I think others have heard the conversation of a young man who, if I had not been there culturally, because of the way that they treated him and perceived him to be, put him in a ward because they thought he was having a psych. He was crazy, Black crazy guy coming out of prison, big and buff. I'm just make it plain. That's for Celeste. So if I had not been there, they never attended to his need. What they did was call the police because they thought he was a threat. If I hadn't intercepted and spoke with the police, it was then Tina Jones, then Dulio, they would have brought a gun in a hospital unit with a guy who was having a very serious medical breakdown, and they never addressed it. So the involvement of where we should continue to be at, the things that we're still advocating for, is huge. However, this is what we chose to do to better the beloved community. Again, one of the most important things is understanding that when police officers bring guns to a mental place, it's not a good place. The medical hospital did not address the gentleman who had a stroke and almost died later, just because of what they were concerned about having a police come. And I give credit to the police, because when I talked with the commander as well as the sergeant, he asked the medical director of the hospital, administrator of emergency, why would you call us to come when there's no crime has been committed? It's just too much in this areas of where we have to continue to make sure, as Dan has pointed, what is taking us so long. This took us this long, still taking us a lot longer. Thank you for allow me to speak some more.
Thank you, Pastor Weisner. I appreciate your thoughts as well. Celeste is giving you lots of claps. And I see hands shaking too. Any other comments or questions? No. So it looks like we have a PCEP meeting tomorrow. Do we have that slide? Or Dory, do you want to mention?
We have a meeting next week.
Oh yeah, next week. Thank you. Not tomorrow. What am I thinking?
You guys know we're gonna start meeting every night now, right?
Sounds like I want to stay hang out with you guys.
You guys are cool with that. Yeah.
So December 13, Dory.
Yeah, December 13th. We are currently aiming to do that in person at the Portland building. That's a goal. We may switch to virtual just depending on availability, but that is our hope. So stay tuned for updates about that and for updates about that agenda, which will be live very soon. And that will be our last meeting of the year. And that's about it. I think this was a great meeting, super informative, super grateful to all of our very knowledgeable guests for the evening. Thank you so much, Jonas and Heidi. Co-chairs, you want to have the final word here?
My only word would be thank you. Thank you for our partners for coming and explaining, expounding, and illuminating some concerns. Thank you for our vigilant and diligent community members for coming and asking wonderful questions, pointed questions. We need that. And thank you for everybody who has supported us, from our facilitators to the PCEP staff and our city partners. We really appreciate you. Without all of you, we wouldn't be able to make the progress we're making. And yes, we need to make much more progress. We shouldn't get happy, but just thank you.
Thank you so much, Celeste, for that. And Tia and Ashley, subcommittee co-chairs. I should have been more specific.
Thank you for engaging with us and spending your evening. I'm hungry for dinner.
Yeah, I got bedtime on my end. But yeah, thank you again. Everybody said thank you for our guests and community members. Always great to be in community with you all. I learned a lot, and yeah, look forward to see you guys next time.
Awesome. And we need to end a little early. That's huge in PCEP world. So with that, the time is 7:55 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned.
Recording stop.